With that, we're going to move back into section 11, and if you'd introduce 11.3, please.
Certainly. So item 11.3 is city planning implications to LVJUSD and enrollment information. This is an information discussion item, and I will yield to Mr. Chris Van Schack, our Deputy Superintendent.
Thank you, Dr. Powers. As you all know, we have seen a lot of news lately about growth in the city of Livermore. And often the question that comes up is the impact that this growth can have and will have on the school district. And so tonight I'd like to share some information about that projected growth and how we're mitigating those challenges both in the short term and in the long term. So here's a overall view of our fair city of Livermore. And just for orientation purposes, the red line represents 580 going from east to west. That's North Livermore, South Livermore Avenue, which divides the city roughly in half. That's railroad that comes in from Stanley Boulevard and Pleasanton and turns into First Street. And so that's kind of how our city gets divided up in terms of our schools. And so when we see the locations of our schools, we see 3 schools in sort of the northeastern area, Christensen, Altamont, and Croce. And then we see schools in the southeastern quadrant, I suppose you could call it. And then over in the west, we've got a number of schools, Mendenhall, Smith, Mitchell, Sunset, and Mocho, which is currently closed. And then the central part of town, we also have a number of schools. So as we look at the setup of these schools, these sort of harken back to the days in the 70s and 80s when neighborhood schools were sort of the way things happened. I mean, we wanted schools that were within walking distance of most of our students, and I'm speaking primarily of elementary and middle school. And so you'll notice the population of our town is sort of centered around these schools in most cases. What you'd note is a lack of schools up in the northwestern part of town. Up until this point, that hasn't been a significant issue because there hasn't been a lot of growth, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But mostly, for the most part, our schools have been neighborhood schools. And in fact, even though we have an open enrollment policy in our district, 85% of our elementary school families still choose their neighborhood school. So there is some attractiveness in Livermore to attending school with students in the neighborhood and being close to the neighborhood school. Clearly, I think we've seen a change. Students aren't walking and riding their bikes to school as much as they used to, but certainly they still enjoy attending schools in their neighborhood. So several times a year, I meet with folks from the city planning department. Steve Riley is here with us today. And we look at projected housing developments in the city of Livermore and how those will impact our schools. And so as we see with these black dots, these are potential housing developments sort of around our city. And so you notice that really there's 2 areas in which we still may see some significant housing growth, and that's really the downtown area and then the Isabel area. And so they talk about the downtown plan, which has actually been in place for a number of years, and it still has some potential to grow out. But ultimately, in our school, in our community, there's very little housing development that's going to take place outside of these 2 main areas. There's pockets of housing here and there, 40 houses or 30 houses, but really any significant housing, as you can see by these black dots, really happen along that downtown corridor or in the Isabel plan. And in fact, the Isabel plan has yet to be formally approved, and so this is just sort of projected growth. We look at our student distribution, and again, you see the clusters in the quadrants that I talked about on the last slide. Each one of these is a dot that represents a student. That's the current student population that's generated from North Livermore. There's really not a lot of development there yet. Sage has just gone in, and I think they're just starting to populate that. 94 students from the northwestern part of Livermore, about a quarter of them at the high school and a quarter of them at the middle school, and the other half are at elementary school. Predominantly at the elementary school, they go to Rancho, Las Positas, or Lawrence, and then they're spread out among some other school sites as well. This is our projected enrollment over the next decade, and you can see the line there is pretty flat. We're experiencing some growth, but really among the elementary schools. If you looked closely, we're looking at about an increase of about 400 students over the next decade at the elementary school. And so that's really what we're looking at mitigating is, do we have the capacity in our elementary schools to house those 400 students? Again, here's the sort of a picture of the North Livermore. Up in the upper left-hand corner, you see the rectangle, and you can see the schools that are closest to that rectangle being, down Portola. You see Lawrence, Maryland, to a certain extent. Those are all about 3 miles away. So maybe not what we would consider to be neighborhood schools. One of the things I think it's worth noting is the urban growth boundary, which does limit the amount of future growth. This is the same map. It shows the schools and the population, but the urban growth boundary prevents development outside of this rather dark line unless it goes before the vote of the population of Livermore. Up in the upper portion of that picture, there's a big green area, and that was the area that was proposed for party homes back some years ago. And so that actually lies outside the urban growth boundary. That's why an election was required to change that. And so, again, a lot of the reason that there's not a lot of growth in Livermore projected is because there's just not a lot of places to put that growth inside the urban growth boundary. So anyways, we go back to the northwestern Livermore, and if I show you this, so that's the red rectangle there. If I zoom it in, that's the area there. The upper portion of that in the middle, that's Las Positas College. And again, you see some potential growth area as a result of the Isabel plan. And one potential way that we could mitigate that growth down the road, and again, the Isabel plan, I think the planned build out would be 2026. But one potential way to mitigate that would be to look into the purchase of property in this northwestern portion of Livermore for a potential school in the future. I think it bears noting that some of our neighboring communities that maybe didn't plan for far enough into the future are experiencing some growing pains because the land doesn't appear when you want it to be there. When we start putting in homes and you say, hey, it's time to build a school, it's not often that you can find an 11-acre parcel to put a school on. And so I think one of the reasons that we're talking about this now is because if we have a build out in 2026 and we generate to house a school here. So anyway, this black area here that I've boxed, I'm going to zoom in on it here. That's the Montevina property, which used to house the charter school. You have 16 buildings to the left. I think we all recall that construction project. So there's really two different pieces of this. One, the buildings to the left, the other, the fields to the right. There's been some conversation about joint use projects potentially. If the board wanted us to look into the acquisition of these two pieces of land with LERPD, because the city is still looking to on the facility itself. Again, you see 16 buildings. The potential here is for a school at some point, along with maybe the buildings toward the top of the opportunity. I think this facility or this parcel will soon be going up for sale. And so it presents us with a sort of a unique opportunity to perhaps look to acquire an insurance policy. It's not something that we need today, but again, if we need it 5 or 6 or 7 years in the future, it's less likely that a parcel of land in this area is going to become available. I think it's also worth noting that this is the only parcel in this northwestern Livermore piece that has been zoned potentially for education. So that's another factor. And so I present this to the board as sort of a reassurance that we are in fact looking toward the future and making sure that we can accommodate students, not just today and tomorrow, but a decade from now, and also looking for some direction as to whether or not it's worth our time to potentially pursue the acquisition of a facility that could be beneficial to us down the road. So again, comments, questions, ideas, next steps, I'd be happy to hear all of that.
Thank you, Mr. Vanchak. We'll start off with Mr. Wenzel. You are Mr. Wenzel.
I just looked over here. I think it's a great opportunity. My question is, though, Plan B, if it doesn't come to fruition, what are we looking at 10 years now as another option to put in here? Is, when you look at the column of things and the growth of the city, what would be an option for those 400 kids?
So right now we do have capacity available, and we will into the future. Lawrence Elementary's got room. We can find space at a number of different schools. I think the challenge there is it's not as attractive to take a neighborhood and divide it among a bunch of different elementary schools. So in terms of overall capacity in the district, we can house another 500 students without a lot of concern. We do have 2 elementary schools, Arroyo Mocho, that isn't being currently used as an elementary school. We have the former Almond Avenue that's used for Elementary Vineyard High School, and also some extra programs that could be reopened as an elementary school as well. So we do have the capacity in town. The question would be, do we have the capacity in the place where those folks would want it to be? So driving from the Isabel area to Lawrence Elementary School is about 3 miles, which is a little bit further than many of our students would drive now. The students wouldn't drive, the parents would drive now, but it's certainly doable. So if this weren't to come to fruition, we could still accommodate those students.
Yeah, and I'm in total agreement. I've been growing up. I think it's excellent to have a community and a school close by, but just in case, we need to look at all our options. So
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wenzel. Mrs. White?
At one time, I had on my fridge a map of North Livermore, which had 5 more elementary schools, I think 2 middle schools, and 2 high schools. And that was somebody else's 10-year projection. And that just didn't come to pass. So it's really a mega complex of education in North Livermore. And that would have worked if other parts of the future planning for Livermore had come to pass differently. And also the property that you're And in fact, when the charter school folks came to what now is Lawrence School, the student who said the playground has grass was highly quoted. So, and you're also talking about some perhaps non-student uses, like an administration facility or some such. It's really hard to imagine. It's hard enough for people on the east side of town to drive to here, which is on the other extreme of our town. And you're talking about an even farther extreme across the freeway on a hill. This seems to me, maybe it's a good deal to buy distressed property, but it seems to me at this point a force fit to create something to do with a good deal. So I don't think we ought to stop thinking about it, but I'm not ready to rush to judgment.
Thank you, Ms. White. Ms. Ryan?
Yeah, I'm going to say yeah. I'm concerned. And the 11 acres especially, having gone out there, there's a road across that 11-acre parcel now. I don't know if it's a permitted road, but there's a road that goes from the next business park over to this site, right through what would be playing fields. And I guess the thing is, it never hurts to get more information, and that's kind of the spot where I am. And I haven't been inside any of those buildings in a very long time. So I would request that the superintendent, if she can, arrange for us to go over and look, for those of us who haven't been in a long time. I don't know if we can make that arrangement with the bankruptcy court. But if we can, I'd be interested in seeing doing something in terms of having a neighborhood school. Whether this qualifies as a neighborhood school, I question, because I would feel very concerned about students going along that very busy commercial road to get to that school. I wouldn't let a child of mine on a bicycle go to elementary school there. It just wouldn't happen. So I think almost everyone's going to be driving, and whether they're driving, that way, or whether they're driving, across the other way, I don't think it matters as much. And yet it may be an opportunity. And so gathering more information seems prudent. I guess the other thing I would want to know is, do the urban growth boundary restrictions apply to us? That it may stop someone from developing housing, but could we purchase land that's outside the urban growth boundary to house students who are in housing within the urban growth boundary? That would be an interesting question. There are large amounts of flat land just a little further over, and I think flat land is much preferable for a school. I just think it's just more suited to the recreation aspects. I think I need more information, and that's really where I am with it.
Thank you, Mr. Runyon. Mr. Rogie.
Well, I concur with the rest of the board. I'm open to discussion and further information on this. As for schools on hills, I think San Francisco and Oakland have that on us too. But yeah, I would like to look at it. We do probably need to have something on the north side of town, and that's a really good question on the urban growth boundary line. I would be interested to find that out myself. But it seems to be a good deal, and I don't want to miss a good deal. But on the other hand, there's a lot of other questions, financials, so many other things. So yeah, I'm open to get more information and make decisions after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogie. I too am certainly open to get additional information. Simply though, as it's been presented, I think it's a unique opportunity. I come out of a profession where geographical location is everything. And you're looking at, I'm just looking at the numbers I kind of put, looks like 50% of our kids were in elementary school. That would be about 7,000 kids. And if 85% of those, it's 6,000 kids are going to neighborhood schools. So coming across the freeway is far different than going down a road. And I would say, like with your comments, Mrs. Runyon, where it is a business district, but it is a business district. And within that business district, hundreds of homes are being built right now. That one development, the infill project, was 486 homes. And if BART goes, I'm told, don't take it as fact, but I was told that there's another 4,000 homes that might get built there. So how it's comprised, it's more of an urban setting, but that's just might be new to us. But in many jurisdictions, elementary schools on a hill within an urban setting are commonplace. So it might require a little bit more information, but I'm pretty sure they don't make land, not being facetious anyway. Once it's gone, and people tend not to use eminent domain and all kinds of things. It's usually you're just out of luck. And so this looks like a unique opportunity, and I support looking at it in terms of an opportunity and clarifying all the questions, of course. Any further discussion on this? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
With that, we're going to move into our, move back into.
So if I could just get one thing, so since it was information item and you had quite a few questions, I recorded a lot. If other questions come to the board, if you come to your mind, we'll probably do some follow-up, but feel free to email them to me and or Chris.
I guess I'd like to have it just in case agendized again for Thursday so that if we wanted to have a further discussion, it would be
Okay.
within Brown Act compliance to talk
Okay.
about it.
So we have a Thursday workshop. So
Close, so we can at least have a discussion. We get some legal advice on it.
Sure.
And then we can also move it and put it on an open session.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that
for
okay?
Thursday.
You have
That's
time?
great.
Thanks.